You've got Terry. Terry has a doctorate from Bangor University based on the work of Frederick Myers, who's one of the founding fathers from the SPR. His book, based on this thesis, The Science of Spirit Possession, is available to buy. I think there's copies next door. Terry's first book was inspired by Lao Tzu. Today he's talking about inspiration from a personal and scientific perspective.
Thank you, April. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming to listen to what I have to say. Let me just put that down there for a moment. As April said, my doctoral thesis was on the work of Frederick Myers, and he's the second of my principal inspirers, if you like. Would you like to move to the first slide, please, April? Now, Frederick Myers was fascinated by the phenomenon and spent much energy investigating the possible mechanism that allowed the transmission of information from the deepest regions of the subliminal mind, what he called the unconscious, or from a spirit realm into the expressive conscious awareness of the creative genius. Now, I'm going to read a few notes that are actually taken from chapter 12 of my book. And I quote, "In support of the hypothesis that a spirit realm exists in parallel with the physical," literally, I've written hundreds of books, but it's more like thousands of books, are claimed by their authors to have been written under the guidance or the inspiration of channeling from the realms of spirit. Now, from a scientific perspective, naturally, these claims are in need of support for their validity and authenticity. So there are people who take an interest in examining these things from a scientific perspective, and Frederick Myers was one of them. It may also be hypothesized that spirit intelligence, or the intelligent principle, can inspire written works without the conscious awareness of the authors, who may attribute their creative genius to themselves. Many creative individuals, such as artists, and we heard about this yesterday with music, writers and composers of great works of classical composition, claim to have been inspired by help and guidance from spirit realms and attribute the origin of their creations accordingly. For example, Mozart said that his art was a gift from God, and he described his gift as seeing in his mind's eye the composition already written and just copied it down. Such works are simply regarded by modern consensus to be the results of innate genius and a creative imagination, dismissing the spirit realm. So Frederick Myers inspired my work into transpersonal psychology. I first discovered Myers when I was studying for my master's degree in the study of mysticism at Kent University. So doing a doctorate on his work took my research a lot deeper and a lot further. Now, should it be true that creative genius could be the manifestation of a discarnate mind through a living person, there are three possible mechanisms for such phenomena, according to Myers. The first is the subtle influence of spirit in the form of ideas, without the conscious awareness of the writer. Suddenly an idea pops into the mind as if out of nowhere. And this can be attributable to the creative imagination, the innate creativity of the individual. Other possibilities could be inspiration from a spirit. So what I would like to do is to introduce you to Myers' concept of the continuum. And this continuum I find extremely valuable, extremely useful in explaining an awful lot of things. At the sharp end, you have people who are not able to enter into an altered state of consciousness. People who are analytically minded, scientists, mathematicians, purely rational, purely logical, focused on the cognitive here and now. At the other end of the scale, you have those people who are mediumistic and who, at the far extreme end of the scale, completely ungrounded with the real world, the physical world. On the positive side, you have mediums and shaman, and on the negative side, you have the psychotic.
Excuse me, on the negative side you have?
The psychotic.
Yes.
The person who is open, mediumistic, vulnerable, but doesn't know how to deal with it or control it. On the positive side, you've got people who know how to control it. And there's a corresponding model of fragmentation of consciousness, or the fragmentation of the self, where at one end of the scale you've got the person who is in complete control of all their faculties, they're a fully integrated, rounded person, and the other end of the scale you've got the schizophrenic who's all over the place and you've got a fragmented personality. So this continuum shows us that there are varying degrees. We can move along the continuum, and every one of us here can give this some thought and think, well, okay, where am I on that continuum? Am I at one end? Am I at the other? Most of us exist somewhere in between, and we can be influenced by suggestion, we can be hypnotised, we can go into an altered state of consciousness, and if that is the case, then there is a possibility that you could be influenced by spirit, positively or negatively. And in my book, it begins by saying not all spirit possession is negative. Next slide. So that's the continuum. Now, William James is claimed to have dictated his own experiences of the afterlife to the medium channeled Jane Roberts, who also wrote the books of Seth. Some of you may be familiar with Jane Roberts in writing dictated works of Seth, the spirit guide. If you're not familiar with it, it's worth a look. It's quite interesting. So William James is reported as being dictated his afterlife experience to Jane Roberts. Similarly, Frederick Myers, when he died, he promised to continue his work after his death, and he communicated with 3 mediums, one in the United States, one in India and one in the UK, gave them snippets of a puzzle, each of them were completely unrelated with the other 2, and the only way that the puzzle could be solved was by bringing them all together, putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and this is known as the Cross Correspondence, written by Saltmarsh, on the Cross Correspondence of Frederick Myers as he communicated from the afterlife. And I can stand here now and say to you that Frederick Myers is still communicating from the afterlife through mediums who are in contact with him. So, next slide, please. So, the opposite ends of the continuum of inspiration and automatic writing. Let's go back to that continuum, that sharp wedge shape. On one end, you've got subtle inspiration, and on the other end of the scale, you've got automatic writing. Now, automatic writing is where the receiver of the information is not conscious of what's going on at all. They're in an altered state, they're in a trance. And the hand is taken possession of by a spirit who uses it to write. And the owner of the hand is completely unaware of what's going on. This is complete spirit possession. And I'm very, very fortunate because I've witnessed both ends of the continuum myself. I was at a spiritualist medium development group, and those of you who are mediums will understand what I'm talking about. A group of mediums who were practicing, developing their skills, and on this particular occasion, with the exception of myself, because I'm at the sharp end. I don't go into trance. I don't communicate with spirit. So my experience is on the sharp end, not the thick end. So in this development group, I was the only one that didn't go into trance. Everyone else did, and they were all showing signs of disgust. Something evil smelling, bitter taste in the mouth. All this business. They wanted to get out of there, but they were in trance. So, and every single one of them was affected in the same way, which I needed to understand, and I go on to explain that in chapter 3 of my book. It's a fascinating examination. But I witnessed this, and one of the participants was a young man who had recently discovered automatic writing. And he was sat there with a pad on his lap and a pen in his hand, and he went into a deep trance. I thought he was going to fall off his chair. He was a somnambulist. He was gone, away with the fairies. And his hand started to write, while everyone else was in a state of disgust. So I got out of my seat and stood behind him to see what he was writing, and the message was for me. It referred to me by name. And he said, it laughed, and went, ha, 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 Terry doesn't know. Ha, 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 he has no power. And it was dead right, and it was dead scary, because everyone was being adversely affected by a dark spirit, and the dark spirit was talking to me through automatic writing. That development group never met again. They said, forget it. I never again want to experience anything like that. But I was curious. I needed to understand this. So when I went back to the spiritualist church and said, why was this allowed to happen? And I was told that the guides stepped aside, allowed it to happen so that you could learn. And that was the beginning of my education. And it enabled me to understand the subtle inspiration and the automatic writing. Can we go to the next slide? Now, Chico Xavier is a Brazilian. I think he's deceased now. But he was a Brazilian illiterate. Couldn't read or write. From a poor family in Brazil. And he wrote 450 books by automatic writing.
Psychography.
3 of them have been published in English. I showed a couple of one of them in an earlier slide. Missionaries of the Light. And I had a copy of this before I gave my entire library away back to the university. I told you about that. Missionaries of Light. Missionaries of Light is an interesting read because it's dictated by automatic writing, and it gives an account of spirits, people in the spirit realm, learning how to communicate with us on the earth. So where our mediums here go to development circles to learn how to become mediums, to communicate with spirit, the same thing's happening the other side.
It's a dance.
And Missionaries of Light is all about that, and how this student is being taught how to communicate. So that's the work of Francisco Xavier, well worth looking into. Can we have the next slide? Now, this is of particular interest to neurologists. They need to understand what's going on in the brain. And research has been done by Perez, 2012, American neurologist, and working with Brazilians from Sao Paulo. And they conducted experiments where they tested the brain activity of people who were automatic writers, and they studied their brains whilst they were writing and when they were not writing. And they had a control group. It was a double-blind clinical trial using all the protocols of scientific research, mechanistic scientific research. And what they discovered was very, very interesting. They discovered that, contrary to the assumption, and we would assume that when a person is writing, consciously aware, the brain is active, okay? And what they discovered was that in a trance, when these participants were being subjected to automatic writing, the brain was not active. And that raises some really interesting questions, doesn't it?
bypassed the brain.
It was bypassing of the brain. But the brain, the central nervous system, has to be used to move the hand. So these are really interesting questions, aren't they? But it showed evidence that the writing was being done not by the conscious awareness of the participant. Next slide. Now, I'm going right back to the beginning now. The sharp end, where I'm not a medium, and I don't go into trance easily. But when I was telling you at breakfast, wasn't I, about my experience. People often ask me how I got started on this journey, and this is how I got started. My world collapsed as a businessman in 1991, and I found myself as a homeless hermit living in the mountains of Crete. And I began to get mystical experiences that I didn't understand. So I had questions. And I was saying to the universe, what do I do now? You know, everything's been wiped away. Here I am, homeless, penniless. What do I do now? My house was being repossessed in England. But I was compelled to come back to the UK. And before the house was possessed, I still had a word processor. I was compelled to write. And it was such a compulsion, I found myself getting up in the morning, even before I got dressed, and I'd sit at the word processor, and this stuff was coming out. For 3 months, I punched the keyboard, and this stuff came out. And when I had written it, I read it. Now, at the same time, I was developing my skills, learning how to use hypnotic suggestion, because whilst I was in Crete, I discovered the gift of hands-on healing. And people would say to me, how does that work? How do you do that?